Markus, so nice
Hi.
to see you again.
Thanks, Ruin,
And
for having me, and thanks for Flame Station for recording this session. That's great. Great being part of this.
yeah, and thanks for your time. I know you've been really busy. We've been talking on email, but you've been really busy with some work for the United Nations around artificial intelligence and regulation. So, yeah, thanks a lot for
Indeed.
your time. Just for our audience, just give me an opportunity to introduce Markus. And I'm just sharing some highlights of some of the work that he's doing. So Markus's research focuses on developing policy, recommendations, soft law, and regulatory guidance for governments aimed at artificial intelligence, neurotechnology, and robotics. And in short, AI in our tech. He is an honorary professor at Stirling University, a clinical professor of practice at Waxen University, and the founding director of the Human AI Institute. Markus has been a co-founder, non-executive director, and board member with startup and scales up in civil society, crypto, neurobanking, and drone technology. And more on the drone technology, but later. He's also been part of the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, and more specifically part of the group of experts on risk management and regulatory systems since 2013. Markus, I would like to give you an opportunity just to tell us how you got into AI, and then also share a little bit of some of the other interesting projects around drones.
Sure, very happy to. So first of all, thank you for having me and the introduction. It's great being here. And you set the scene already, although the work you described with the United Nations is by coincidence, happenstance, or maybe just pure luck. And I also should add, it's completely pro bono. So I'm enjoying that as a passion, really, that has developed into almost a full-time activity, certainly over the last few months. I'll come to that in a minute. So my professional background really is 30 years in banking, global financial markets, and thereof 20 years, or actually more than 20 years in risk management. At the height of the credit crisis, I worked with regulatory bodies, organizations such as the World Bank on a variety of projects across Africa and Asia, and subsequently also with regulators, including the SEC, the European Commission, and others. And what excited me about that is that that piece of work, particularly it's being done well, can be very impactful for large communities, potentially globally. So that's important, that doing good thing. And then, as you said, I was a co-founder. I helped establishing the UK Municipal Bonds Agency, which is a specialist financing institution for the UK government. And then I guess through some of my contacts and some of the early academic work I was doing, bearing in mind, I'm a professional, I'm not an academic. And this professor of practice expresses that to some extent, but 30 years life experience, I guess you could say. So just by happenstance, through some of my academic work, and also I was involved with a lot of trade organizations in the risk management space globally, Premier, the Institute of Risk Management, and others, I happened to be approached to join a relatively new group back then, that was in 2013, which is Unity GRM. It's the Group for Risk Management and Regulatory Systems that sits under the umbrella of the European the ECE within the UN, but is ultimately responsible globally. And I had the opportunity to work and cover a huge range of thematics, including crisis management, disaster recovery, response strategies for pandemics, and cybersecurity for autonomous vehicles. Now, as part of this work, I have conducted research and analysis of global regulation. And in mid-2020, and it feels an awful long time ago now, I started raising the risk of what I call AI and tech. That's the artificial intelligence, neurotechnology, and robotics within this expert grouping at UN level. And the way I started there was really talking about the potential to threaten existence of humanity. And
Yeah.
whilst back then that sounded a very, very stark statement, it certainly was listened to and it evolved over time. Oddly, if you look at recent news this week, last week, and some of the open letters that have been put out there by all the academics and the science community globally, there really seems to be a concern that AI poses. Now, as a risk manager, I take both into account, and that's very, very important. I focus on the risks, but risks always means upside risks and downside risks. And whilst there's a huge potential for existential risks, there's also huge potential and upside opportunities out there that are groundbreaking and making the world ultimately a better place. And I guess that's some of the issues Flame Station and the organization is also very keen on pushing and looking from an innovative and disruptive technology perspective. So that's my professional background. And then you mentioned the drones already. So
yeah, and the digital twins as well.
Oh, yes, I'll come to that in a minute. So as a hobby, really, at roughly the same time, 2012, 2013, I've started building my own and then developing radio controlled, what I used to call, fixed wing planes first. So that's like a little glider plane out of foam, and then drones. And I started building drones when they weren't available mainstream. And I've got one of my early examples, which is made out of wood and some motors attached to it and a little flight controller. And there wasn't anything stabilized, and it was sort of Mad Hatter scientist almost, and was flying that around. But then a few years ago, with the advent of consumer drones, I moved more into turnkey solutions. And frankly, these things have become so reliable and so cheap that they are largely accessible now. Now, since COVID, then I've been experimenting with these consumer drones, and I've been combining them with third-party AI solutions, because if you think about it, it's a flying object, ultimately a flying camera with some sensors attached. Usually the software that comes with it is kind of locked in by the manufacturers, but as these things mature over time, they open the software development kits, as they call them, SDKs, up.
Yes.
And that means third-party providers can plug into those through APIs. And that's when they really become powerful. So as part of this hobby initially, I've worked with my local authority here, with the municipality, and been deploying and developing unique workflows that use these consumer drones, combine them with third-party apps, and we use them for monitoring wildlife habitats and restoring them. And then when you capture the footage, combine them with AI and build almost in an automated fashion geospatial models, all of a sudden you end up building what is widely known as digital twins. So you can take pictures of objects, and you don't need a large number of pictures. You just take pictures of these objects, you model them in a rendering engine, and you end up with a 3D model. Now, these 3D models have been used a long time for gaming experiences, but increasingly it's becoming important to using that as a local method to collect local data and then analyze it globally. So I'm working with a very exciting organization called the Scubaverse, which got to see some of my aerial approaches for modeling wildlife habitats outside. I live outside London, some of the riverbeds there, and they have approached me and they want to work with me to develop similar approaches for submarine environments. And we're currently talking to the governments of several island nations, some of them really threatened by climate change. They haven't got, frankly, many years left. And the idea is we want to produce digital twins of particularly the coral reefs to understand better environmental impacts and risks, analyze them both at local level, but also at global level. So the United Nations is very interested in building sustainable development databases where they use locally harvested data And the same could be done in Africa, for instance, in the savannah, in the desert. You can use it for wildlife counting and other methods. Collect that data locally, analyze it globally, bring citizen scientists together with academic research institutions to get most out of that data. And maybe most importantly, develop local communities as the stewards of the digital assets they have, the digital data they produce out of the natural assets they have. And that's really taking off right now. So I'm having a lot of conversations across the globe with people who are interested in that kind of approach. And that amazes me, because you use established technology, you add AI to it, you develop physical agency over those, and all of a sudden you can do really magical things, to be honest.
With this, the coral, would you have underwater drones to do that?
Yes, we're looking at developing swimming drones. Now, you will imagine an aerial drone, if you program it and it becomes what I call an autonomous flying robot, you can do similar things with underwater drones, but you have to be mindful. The medium is different. The speed is obviously limited, how fast they can go in water. And then you got refraction effects as well, because of the density of the water, the salinity, these kind of things. So optical effects, but ultimately you can do the same thing. And if you then use some of the geospatial model engines and the AI that's sitting behind that, you can replicate very good models, geospatial models of underwater landscape. So one example I did last week, just by chance, I found a 4K video of one of the diving excursions to the Titanic, and I was looking for good footage of in that case, the submarine swimming around the hull of the boat. And even just a 30-second clip you can use an extraction engine to get individual frames into the AI, and the AI then can calculate the position of the camera, each individual frame and the camera, and can produce a geospatial model. And the results are simply amazing and astonishing. And previously, and that's also important for me, previously these approaches would require enormous computational power and big machines. Now you can do it on a laptop. You can do it even sometimes just on a mobile phone if you really needed to. And that, to me, is just astonishing and amazing. And obviously in Africa, that brings huge opportunities, because the mobile network is so well established and everyone has got a mobile phone as well.
Yeah, there's a leapfrog opportunity there. But I guess it's becoming so democratized in terms of having access to the technology. It makes it just so much more accessible than even 10 years ago or 5 years ago.